Small, portable sampler seems to be pretty popular right now. We, for example, have Teenage Engineering making not one but two portable samplers. We also have the slightly older Circuit Rhythm and the newer Sonicware Liven Lofi, as well as their Lofi XT. And then there's the whole range of 1010 music boxes, some of which can sample. So mini samplers seems to be a little bit of a trend, and today Roland are joining in on the fun with their Compact P-6. This is literally recorded minutes after unboxing the P-6 and just started taking some notes. The P-6 is a portable sampler. It has a built-in battery. It also has a pretty easy to use step sequencer. You can sample into it with the built-in mic and the analog input, as well as the USB. Whoop, 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 whoop. There's also an application for transferring files, but it's very basic. There's also a granular sort of synth engine that you can use to create pretty cool sounds. There's also sample chopping, but it's very, very basic. And you can record samples either in 44.1 kHz all the way down to 11 kHz for that gritty lo-fi feel. And before we get into how you make music with this, I just want to play you some sound demos to give you an idea of what's possible to create with it. Some I've made myself and some are presets, because it actually comes with some pretty cool demos which shows off its capabilities pretty well. If you actually happen to make some music and you want to release it to the world, use today's sponsor, DistroKid. DistroKid is a really affordable way to release your music to Tidal, Apple Music, and Spotify, for example, and a bunch of other stores. It costs about $22 a year to upload unlimited amounts of music, and I have a link in the description, and if you use it, you get a discount, and you also support my channel and future videos like this. When it comes to any sort of workstation, whether it's this tiny and portable or it's larger like a machine or an MPC, the workflow is really important, how you actually make music on it. Because if that's not fun and intuitive, everything else kind of falls apart. It doesn't really matter if it has a laundry list of specs. It needs to be fun. And that's what I want to focus very much on in today's video, just giving you a good feeling for if this device is for you or not. So let me create some music, just improvised stuff on the fly. So we start by selecting a pattern. You press the pattern button here, and then we have different banks, 4 banks here of patterns, 16 patterns each. Now the first thing I want to do is just change the BPM a bit. Let's go for something a bit slower, 105 BPMs. Then we use these pads to trigger samples, and there are multiple banks here. So there are 8 banks, and you have access to the samples in all of the 8 banks for every single pattern. I'm going to start here with this kick here. I'm going to tune it down a bit. We can also change the level here. And I'm going to put down a few steps. And now I need to lengthen the pattern. You can hit Shift and Last to manually lengthen it up to 64 steps. However, I don't want to program the drums again, so instead I'm just going to hit Shift and copy, duplicate, enter, and done. So now I have 32 steps, and I can just press again, done. Now I have 64. If I check last here, go out, check last here, 64 steps. I'm gonna use this sample here, which is already sliced up. And since the volume is a bit uneven, we can just record these knob movements into the sequencer. So recording knob, so recording level automation. And there was one note in the bass line I want to change, so I press keyboard here, and now we can see the steps here on the step sequencer, and now we can just toggle the page. So if you look here at the screen, you can see going from first page, second, third, and fourth page. And there's one note here I don't like, so I'm going to remove it. And if I want to go and manually change the note value of any of the steps, I just hold it down. You can see here, we can change the note value here. So this one is a C4. And from this view, we can also toggle by pressing Granular. So you can have, so you can change velocity, you can change the probability of a step. You can also change the gate length, the timing, so micro timing, so back and forth. So whether or not the note plays exactly on the step or a little before or a little after. And then you can also do sub-steps. So if we go back to the snare here, we can go to the first page and we can add a note here or a step here, and we can change the probability to like 50%, and then we can change the timing just a little bit, and then add some sub-step, basically creating ratcheting effects. And yeah. And I don't think you can actually copy a particular step, so that's something that I'm missing. If there is a way, I haven't been able to figure that out. Got this hi-hat, and it has delay, I think. So we can go to mixer here, and we can actually turn down the delay. So if you hit Shift, P envelope is for pitch envelope, then we have voice, filter, mixer, then there's the settings for the send, delay, and reverb, and then there's the pattern clear functions here in the menu. But basically if you hit Shift and mixer, we can set the panning, and we can also set the level of delay send and reverb send. And Shift and gate lets us toggle between poly and mono, so we can do chords. And we have octave up and down here. There's also tie functionality. And now I want to record this synth sound here into the sequencer, and then I'm going to record a filter sweep. This is a little bit finicky compared to some other devices. Stuff is hidden in the menus, but it's not too bad. We're on the synth sound, we go to Shift, Filter, and now we actually have filter here, type on this knob, and then we have cutoff, and we have resonance over here, and here's the depth, so how much it affects. And all of the parameters that you can control using these knobs here can be recorded into the sequencer. If you want to play with the panning, you can go to Shift Mixer, and you have panning over here, and you can record this into the sequencer, but you can also just go here to Auto Pan, press Enter, and turn it on. And there's a random setting. I think in the manual there's supposed to be more than one setting, but on my unit there's only one, so random. And the random setting pans randomly between left and right for each step or each trigger in each step. So I don't want to use that. Instead, I want to just record the panning. want to add this sound. And I also want to mute some stuff. When you hit shift here, we can mute individual pads, and we can also mute the groups. Not half bad, but I'm not sure if it fits with the rest. It doesn't really fit, so we'll try something different. And I'm just gonna clear the bass line and add a new one. And here's the thing. While things take a little longer because I'm explaining it while I'm doing it, this is totally improvised, it is actually pretty fast. So if I want to change the melody, for example, you just clear the pad, hit enter. And now that we have this little melody here, we can actually just go up an octave and add something. We can hit shift and filter, select the low pass filter, and we can go into shift, voice, and here we have attack, we have decay, and we have sustain, and we can play with that as well. Now I've recorded some variation here to the attack, decay, sustain into the sequencer. So while the small form factor has obvious negatives, the size itself makes it a little difficult to play on this keyboard here. The menu system is, yeah, it's something you need to get used to. You need to learn what things are called and where it's located. There's a lot of shift functions, to be honest. But frankly, I haven't spent that much time with it, and I can already make music on it. And to me, that says a lot. It tells me that this is a well-designed portable little sampler. Not without its problems, however. I'll get to those later in the video. Something you probably also want to know about is how to sample into this little device here. And it's actually very straightforward. First, we need to actually delete a sample from a sample pad. This is destructive, so once deleted, it's gone. So you select the pad, you press delete, and then delete again, I think, and then it's gone and empty. If I play something here on the synth, you can actually see the level of the incoming audio being represented here on the step sequencer. So you can see the steps lighting up, indicating how loud the input volume is. To record a sample, you just hit the sampling button and make sure that you're on the right sampling pad, and then press the sampling button again, and you should start sampling, and it will end when you press the sampling button again or when the time runs out. Or you can set a specific sampling length that you want to sample. This is good for loops, for example. Here we have it. Now, if you want more sampling time, you can change the sampling frequency down from 44.1 kilohertz all the way down to, say, 11 kilohertz. And that will give, of course, a more lo-fi sound, but longer sample time. We can also press sampling, press a pad here, and make sure that the delete here is not lit up. This enables the internal microphone it's sitting over there. We can press sampling again and then just make a little sound. Whoop, 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 whoop. Now when we're sampling, we can also use the four knobs above the sampling button here to change various things. For example, the first one changes from mono to stereo. Mono means you have longer record times. Stereo basically means you half it. The second knob sets the length of recording. You can also set the record trigger to be off, to be synced, or to be a dB threshold where it starts recording at a certain dB level. And the fourth knob sets the gain for the microphone. When it comes to sampling, there's also something called step sampling, and let me show you what that is. So with sampling, we hit Shift and turn this knob here to set the number of steps. So here we can do 6 steps, for example. It says standby, then it's number 2, press sample again, and then it normalizes the samples, and by turning on the keyboard, I have a little drum kit. And I can turn on polyphony and play it back polyphonically, and amazing finger drumming skills right there. So what could this actually be used for? Well, for example, we could record different vocal phrases. Hey, Bob eats Volkas. Okay, maybe not the best use of this, but you get the idea. Bob eats Bob eats Volkas. Bob. Okay, and when it comes to sampling and sample chopping, you can't manually sample chop, but you can take a sample and then chop it up automatically into a number of slices. You set the number of slices you want. It's pretty rudimentary. I don't think it's super good for like beat making, but it's there. Now, before I show you how to use the P-6 with a MIDI keyboard, which is awesome, here's a word from today's sponsor. So if you're looking for a way to upload your music to, say, Tidal, Apple Music, Spotify, or other online stores, but you're not quite sure where to start, go and check out DistroKid. There's a couple of reasons why I like DistroKid and why I use them. One of them is that they're very affordable at $22 a year for unlimited music uploads to all the relevant stores. Another reason is that they have a hyperfollow feature. So basically, when you upload your music using DistroKid, they also create this custom page where all of your links to all of the different stores and streaming services are gathered, so you don't have to put that together yourself, and you can just share one hyperfollow link to all your followers and listeners. And another thing I like is that DistroKid has an app for your smartphone. If you want to release your music to the world, go and check out DistroKid, linked down in the description. If you use my link, you get a discount and you support the channel. Now, some people might feel that connecting a MIDI keyboard to a sampler of this size might feel a little weird, defeating the purpose of this small portable thing, but I actually really like it. I prefer having a keyboard when I'm making music, if nothing else, because these small keys, while usable, they're difficult to play. So to make this work, you need a MIDI cable that has DIN MIDI in one end and one of these small TRS plugs in the other. And then we just go MIDI out from the MIDI keyboard into MIDI in here on the Roland. And I didn't have to set anything up, but there are settings in the menu for MIDI channels and whatnot. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can use this. So first up, MIDI channel number 4 here is set to the Granular engine. Meaning that regardless what sound you have selected here, what pad you have selected, you can just play the Granular engine. The second way to use the MIDI keyboard is setting it to channel number 11 or whatever you've set up in the device itself. Now you have one key per sample. So we have access to all the samples on the device as one-shots, so you can't play them polyphonically this way, but we'll get to that. So as one-shots spread across the keyboard. And this is good for a number of different reasons, but one of the best ones is that it can actually be a little annoying finding the right sample by just pressing here and going through here. So in this mode, I can play samples that are, for example, not in the same bank at the same time. And I can also record this into the sequencer very effectively. So I could play the kick and the bass here at the same time, even though they're located in very different banks here on the actual device. Play one sound chromatically and also polyphonically. So we just press Shift here, MIDI channel number 15, And then I'm gonna go and look up the sound. Let's go back to the granular engine, and we hold pattern and granular to select a new sample that we are playing through the granular engine. So I definitely recommend using the P-6 together with a MIDI keyboard. It definitely opens it up a bit more, makes it even faster to use. When I review any sort of music workstation, whether it's a small sampler or a larger one of the key things I'm looking at is how easy is it to copy patterns over so you can make variations to them. And thankfully, even though it requires a few shift commands, it's not that complicated on the P-6. So we have this pattern here. And I want to copy it over. Now what I can do is I hold Shift and copy. And you can see we can copy pattern, we can copy part. And from this menu you can also duplicate, which means that you have a pattern that is say 16 steps and then you want to duplicate it to 32 steps, for example, keeping the notes. So that's one way to just extend a pattern. So we are on pattern number 1, we press enter, and now we select the destination. So pattern number 2, we press enter, pattern number 1, we have pattern number 2. So on pattern number 2, we can quickly add and we can make some changes to this sound here. For example, we can reverse it and play with the start and end. Now I can quickly just add a few additional kicks here. I can change the probability for those steps. On some steps I'll add a kick, press granular here. I hold down the step, press granular till I get to probability, and then I press here again until I get to this view with a little circle, add sub steps. And now if we go back here, we can play pattern number 1. Now another thing that I think is really important is how fast it is to delete something, to erase what you've been doing. So if we go to pattern number 3 here, we got this beautiful preset pattern, far better than anything I've made on this device, but yeah, it's really cool. Okay. It hurts a little bit to destroy it, but I'm gonna do it for science. So you can see down here, pattern clear. You can clear all, pad, and motion. So I hold shift, press all, and now we press enter, and now we have an empty pattern. And this pattern, if we press last here, is 64 steps. So we turn that down to 16 steps, and I'm gonna see if I can show you something here. We got a little beat going. So hold down shift here and press copy, and we go here to duplicate and we press enter. So we have now gone from a 16-step pattern to a 32-step pattern. And if I'm not happy with the bass line, it's shift, clear, pad. Something that can be a little tricky when you're working on a beat is that you don't know in which bank the actual sample that you want to edit is. So for example, if I want to go back and edit that synth sound, I'm not entirely sure where it is. There, I think. And now I'm going to hit Shift and Mixer, and we're turning up the delay, the reverb. You can also go in here under delay and reverb, and you can change the delay, sync, delay time settings for the reverb and so on. Also really important for me when it comes to workflow is it fast to save stuff? And yeah, you just hit Shift, right. You can select all, you can select pad, just saving the pad. And there's a couple of different other things. You can, for example, save just the pattern. But yeah, I usually just save all. Another really important workflow thing to me is it quick and easy to lengthen a pattern? And like I showed you before, you just hit this button here and you can change from 32 to up to 64 steps. And then changing pages. This is actually something that not every single workstation or sampler does really well, but it works well on this one. So Shift and pages, and you can see here that we are moving through page 1, page 2. So it's not too bad actually for being such a small device, but there is a lot of these shift commands and understanding how to access things that you need to learn. Once you kind of learn it, it's not that difficult. Here's a couple of other really important workflow tips and tricks. So one thing you definitely want to set up in the menu, if you scroll here, there is a metronome. Press enter. You can have the metronome off. You can have it while you're recording, and I think you can have it running all the time, but I keep it on record. And there's the level for the metronome, so you can set the audio level to something that you enjoy. And there is also count in. And thank you, Roland. I think that all devices where you make a beat like this needs count in. I think you save a ton of time because when you don't have count in, you sometimes have to loop a pattern around and then to really start your recording at 1 if you're playing live into it. Because oftentimes it's hard to nail that first note, especially if you have to press play at the same time. So this is something that I think is super important. Another important setting that you have under menu is P quantization, so pattern quantization. And I've set it to all, but you can also just set it to specific pads. So you can have quantization for specific pads or for every pad. And according to the manual, this is a playback quantization of sorts. So you have a record quantization that you can turn on while you're recording, but sometimes you forget about that. So I just have an all quantization set up here, and there's also the quantization amount here. So you can go super quantized. I have it at 70. I think that's pretty good. Now, if you want to record with quantization, you press Shift here, quantize off, on. Now, something people always ask about when it comes to small sampler workstations is there a song mode? And no, there's no song mode on the P-6. And I'm not sure how they would actually make one for it that would be easy to use because of the tiny display and everything. So I wouldn't hold my breath for Roland to add one either. But then again, with SP404, they've added a ton of remarkable stuff over the course of time. So you never quite know. Sometimes they do surprise you. Next up, I want to take a look at the Granular engine. It's basically a granular synth engine that takes a sample, chops it up into tiny, tiny pieces, and creates this sort of atmospheric sound out of it, or just a jumbled mess, depending on how good you are with it. I will say, however, that just like on the previous compacts, I think it's called the S6, as soon as you start doing more detailed editing, you really start to notice how small the screen is. And for a granular synth, having a big readable screen with nice graphics to really show you what's going on with the sample is really helpful. And I feel that this is a problem with the P-6, but you have to keep in mind that on the P-6, this is not the main selling point. It's more like a bonus. So we're gonna delete this sample here, and I'm gonna sample some radio. So to do this a little bit smoother, I'm actually gonna connect a MIDI keyboard, and I also printed the manual because honestly, it is a little difficult. So when we access the voice menu here, these knobs here control the granular engine. spread, basically where the grains are being generated within the set parameters. The density of grains. So think of this as like how crowded the sound gets. So at the moment I've turned it all the way, well, to its lowest value. So we can still hear some of that original sample, and let's turn it up. You hear how it gets more crowded, more energetic. And knob number 3 controls the grain volume, so if it's set to 0, all the grains are equal in level. Turn it up. You will notice that the sound becomes a bit more dynamic. And the magic with granular synthesis is that you can take something like this and turn it into But I will be absolutely honest and say that it's not the easiest granular engine to use, even though I've read the manual pretty carefully. It's a little finicky to use, and it wouldn't be my go-to choice for like a granular synth, but as an added bonus, it's pretty nice. I also have to briefly mention the effects. I won't go into super detail, but there are these effects over here with 3 controls. You have a looper, a chromatic pitch shifter, a delay, a scatter effect, a filter, and the multi-effect, which can be a chorus, isolator, resonator. There's this vinyl stop thing, and yeah, lots of other effects, as well as, if you go here, shift, delay, and reverb, that you can set sends to individually per sample. And I quite like this vinyl effect. And for the effects, you can turn off which samples are being sent to the effects and not. So if you don't want everything to be affected by the scatter, for example, you can just turn that off. So I want to end today's video with some final thoughts and discussing some alternatives to the P-6. The P-6 is a good portable mini sampler, and frankly it's actually quite fun to use, and I hope my video has shown that. But it is very mini, it's very small. The small screen is difficult to read at times, and while the UI is pretty logical and it's not too difficult to learn, except maybe for the Granular engine, some things just doesn't work well on a small screen. Granular synthesis and sample chopping, for example, are 2 things that would have worked far better with a higher resolution screen. In practice, the small screen means that you have to learn where everything is and what it's named, or the abbreviated version of what it's named that can actually be shown on the tiny screen. And if you haven't used the device for a while, it might be difficult to get back to it and remember where things are located in the menus and what the abbreviations mean and the shift shortcuts. So these are all downsides to the small form factor of this device. Now thankfully it is a pretty basic sampler after all, so there's not that much to remember, but it's something to keep in mind and ask yourself if you can live with it. Now a big negative for me personally is that the P-6 does not have any real time stretching, and it has a pretty short total sample time. And no time stretching means that if you fill up the sample memory with loops, it will be difficult to use them unless you stick to the BPM that they're recorded in. And since you can't actually see the name of a sample, and if you recorded it, it doesn't have a name. If you loaded it, I'm not sure if you can see it anyway, but it can be difficult to know the BPM of a particular loop. So it's definitely a downside. Something that I'm quite positive about is the total polyphony of the unit. It's 16 notes, and the P-6 actually tells you when you have reached the limit, and I think that 16 is absolutely fine for this kind of device. It wasn't a limiting factor in my tests. But something I was missing was some sort of note repeat or perhaps an arpeggiator. This would be a great addition for future firmware updates. Now what about alternatives? What should you be looking at if you like the idea of the P-6 but you want to compare it with something else? So I would say that P-6 belongs to a category of samplers where you find the Novation Circuit Rhythm, Sonicware Liven Lofi 12, and Teenage Engineering KO2. They're portable and fun samplers, but with clear limitations and nowhere near the capabilities of workstations like, for example, the Machina or MPC. That said, all of these portable mini samplers are very fun to use, and very importantly, there is something to the saying that limitations are good for creativity. At least I personally often have a lot of fun with these limited devices, even though I might not make many finished tracks with them. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. As always, thank you for being here. If you want to support what I do, check out today's sponsor, DistroKid, linked in the description. And as always, have a great day. Talk to you all later.